It is August 3rd, 2025, and Trump can't seem to help himself. He just has to keep escalating tensions with Russia further and further, issuing new deadlines and new ultimatums, the latest of which is coming up at the end of this coming week. All of that as Trump is also announcing that he has ordered two nuclear powered submarines to go to the quote unquote appropriate regions. What does that mean? Closer to Russia, near Russia? What does that look like? And why is he doing that? Oh, because he's currently in a social media feud with the former president of Russia and current deputy chairman of the Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev. Now, if you know anything about Medvedev, you know that he is very outspoken on social media, but what has he been saying lately? And is it enough for Trump to escalate to this point? Well, in today's episode of Sanctioned, which is an exclusive weekly deep dive series for my paid subscribers, we look at the current state of this feud, how we've seen these posts go back and forth in recent months, and what it tells us about the overall proxy war that the US continues to wage against Russia, and what we should be concerned about as we are watching Trump escalate over and over again. Let's take a listen to a clip from that episode here on the free feed now. As you may have seen, Trump decided to take to Truth Social on Friday and to make the post that was truly heard around the world, in which he said, quote, based on the highly provocative statements of the former president of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, who is now the deputy chairman of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, I have ordered two nuclear submarines to be positioned in the appropriate regions, just in case these foolish and inflammatory statements are more than just that. Words are very important and can often lead to unintended consequences. I hope this will not be one of those instances. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Now, can we just for a moment take a step back here and imagine that a statement like that was made by Russian President Putin, right? That he was talking about Trump or Biden and everything that the US is doing to fully support and enable a proxy war against Russia, dragging all of the rest of the West into it. Imagine that Putin said something like that, that anything nuclear powered coming from Russia was going to be positioned in the appropriate regions, presumably somewhere around the United States. All US politicians would lose their ever-loving minds and would be calling for World War III. But yet, here Trump is just making a statement like that, throwing it out there, saying that he's sending two nuclear-powered submarines to what he described as the appropriate regions because he's upset over a few social media posts. Like, that is the world that we are living in right now in 2025. And as much as I can look at this overall situation and think like, hey, surely these politicians will show some restraint, right? Surely the US wouldn't get us fully into World War III. But then I look at a post like this one from Trump and I'm like, is this how it's going to end, right? Is this going to be the end of the world as we know it? And then hundreds of years down the road, whatever new civilization comes back around, they look back and they're like, yeah, actually, I wonder what created the nuclear holocaust. Oh, it was because there were some social media posts that one president didn't like. Now, I know that a lot of you look at this and say that it's, just theater. I genuinely hope that that's the case, right? I hope that this is just the back and forth, but I still have to look at Trump's statements as the statements of the US president and not as just the social media ramblings of one Donald Trump. And now when it comes to the back and forth between him and Medvedev, this has been going on for several weeks now. This did not just happen out of thin air, and this has been something that we've seen because, of course, the US wants to get any sort of rise, any sort of commentary that they can possibly get out of Russia. They know that they're not going to get it out of Vladimir Putin, right? The Russian president is very careful about what he says when he says it. His words have a certain weight to them. Now, Dmitry Medvedev, the former president, former prime minister, he's been a bit more outspoken, especially in the post-2022 era, right? He'll get on social media, he'll make a lot of statements, some of which we're going to get into, that are going to rile up some US politicians like, say, Trump. I would say that they are working accordingly when it comes to the reaction that Medvedev is trying to get, at least from Trump's ridiculous post. Not so much from the fact that the US is like, oh yeah, let's send, some nuclear powered submarines over close to Russia and really get these tensions escalated even more so than they already are. And it's also important to keep in mind that there is no winner in any kind of nuclear confrontation. I mean, there is no world in which, oh, the US shoots off a little small tactical nuke and then Russia just says, oh, okay, that's fine. And then everyone backs down and everyone goes home and then we all have no, we're talking about the end of the world, the end of civilization as we know it. We're talking about a nuclear holocaust that would ensue as you continue to watch tensions escalate. And in a situation like that, you would be lucky to go out in the first hours. That's something that you do not want to survive because it would be so horrific and so devastating that you would wish that you were dead. So just something to keep in mind as you're watching these statements back and forth, because I think that some US officials have tried to make it sound like, oh, we'll just create tactical nukes. We'll just, we'll go at this at a smaller nuclear scale. It's like there is no smaller nuclear scale. You are talking about World War III and the end of the world when you get into those confrontations. There is no backing down once you get to that point, which is why there has been such a big focus on deterrence. But it's also a reminder that especially when you're talking about the US and Russia being the two countries with the two largest nuclear arsenals in the world, this is going nowhere good fast. And if you haven't been following this situation closely, then you may be wondering, when did this start, right? When did Trump and Medvedev really get into this kind of back and forth spat on social media? Well, if you go back to June, you have this situation where the former Russian president was very critical of the current US president and the decisions that were being made by his administration. Why is that? What was the US up to in June? Oh, that's right. The US was actively waging war against Iran. As a reminder, you had the US supporting Israel in its initial attacks on Iran. And then you had Trump bragging about that support and then taking it a step further, making sure that the US was carrying out strikes of its own targeting Iranian nuclear facilities. Iran, a sovereign nation that the US is not supposed to be at war with, and yet they are in so many different areas. On June 22nd, Medvedev took to X to say, quote, "What have the Americans accomplished with their nighttime strikes on 3 nuclear sites in Iran? One, critical infrastructure of the nuclear fuel cycle appears to have been unaffected or sustained only minor damage." He went on to say, 2, the enrichment of nuclear material, and now we can say it outright, the future production of nuclear weapons will continue. 3, a number of countries are ready to directly supply Iran with their own nuclear warheads. And it was that last comment that really seemed to set Trump off, because we have to remember that for years and years now, you have US politicians who have claimed that Iran was months, weeks, even days away from being able to create a nuclear weapon. But that doesn't take into account a scenario where, say, other countries that have nuclear warheads give Iran support, direct support. And so now Trump is in this position where he's like, oh crap, not only do I have to deal with making sure, or trying to make sure, that Iran doesn't create its own nuclear weapon, but now the US has to deal with the possibility of other countries getting involved and giving Iran direct support. So Trump took to Truth Social on June 23rd and in a ranting paragraph claimed that Medvedev was, quote, casually throwing around the N-word, nuclear, and saying that he and other countries would supply nuclear warheads to Iran. Now, a lot of people have really fixated on the fact that Trump is trying to turn nuclear into the new N-word here. But I think what really frustrated Trump about Medvedev's statement was that it was a reminder of the fact that, one, Iran is not isolated. Now, I know we didn't see Russia and China and other countries jump in and provide direct support for Iran by the way of, sending them fighter jets or anything like that during this 12-day war with the US and Israel. A big part of that is because they didn't have any kind of mutual defense treaty with Iran, and Iran wasn't requesting that support that we know of. But it's a reminder that that's possible, right? Iran could create mutual defense treaties with a number of different countries if they chose to, if they felt like they were in a position where they were facing some kind of existential threat, such as from the US and Israel with this war that we know is not over. But the second thing that Medvedev's post reminds us of is that Russia also is not isolated. Russia has a lot of power here. Russia could get much more involved in this conflict all around Iran if it wanted to. And the US knows that, and they know that there is nothing that they can do about it. And that was a clip of this week's episode of Sanctioned. You can watch the full video available right now if you sign up as a paid subscriber over on my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. You can also check it out over on Patreon. That's patreon.com/rachelblevins. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.